Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, hits, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAOddsBreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dimes. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts odds maker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC Fight Night 50 event, which takes place in Ledyard, Connecticut. Now, if you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 6 total bouts. Now, pay attention to the MMAOddsBreaker staff picks article because that is our official picks, and we might make some potential changes depending on any news that's come out during the week and also the weigh-ins. Now, briefly looking back at the last event, our premium package for UFC 177 went 1-0 to win 3.5 units overall. We won our play on Chris Wade in the opening bout of the night. Now, we also had a 2-unit bet on a parlay that included Tony Ferguson and Carlos Diego Ferreira that also cashed for about 2.12 units. So it was a very profitable night. Now, back to the present, UFC Fight Night 50 features a 10-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass this Friday. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the preliminary card is a bantamweight matchup featuring Chris the Real Deal Beal, who is 9-0 overall, taking on Tateki Matsuda, who is 10-5. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Well, I opened Beal minus 290, the comeback on Matsuda, plus 210. Since that time, the line has been bet up. It's minus 350. The comeback on Matsuda is plus 260. So more support coming in for Beal. Not really that surprised. I mean, based off his performance, I mean, tremendous UFC debut, official UFC debut, we should say, getting that knockout win. So Beal has a big upside. I mean, on the show, obviously he was an Ultimate Fighter vet, losing to Holdsworth there, and that's no shame at all. I mean, Holdsworth is a tremendous fighter, obviously, and he's done relatively well in the UFC as well. So there is a big upside at 135 for Beal, I think, but he's not getting a gift here. I know Matsuda's coming into this fight on short notice. He has a veteran type of background. I mean, the guy's fought solid competition throughout his career. And he's a well-rounded veteran. So I'll get right into him actually first for most of you guys that might not know, what Matsuda's about. He's a well-rounded fighter, but he's more of a counter fighter, meaning, I mean, he does have counter wrestling and counter striking. And the bad thing about that is actually he lets his opponents dictate and control the pace of the fight, but he's able to do some pretty nifty things, in counteracting. I mean, he's, for sure, his striking can be very effective. He hits very hard, with his counters. I mean, he times it pretty good as well. So he's capable of doing damage on the feet with his counters, but also in the wrestling realm. More times than not, you see fighters are able to maybe get him to his back, but Matsuda ends up scrambling out of that position, gets top position, and he's pretty smooth too. So he does, unfortunately, wait to see what happens and then kind of reacts after his opponent, but that being said, he is talented and he's no slouch. I mean, in all areas. I mean, even on the feet, he's got a nice high kick. He seems to land it pretty often as well. So he's pretty dangerous in all aspects of the game. He's got good ground and pound on the ground. Doesn't have a ton of submissions, but he definitely has some decent BJJ to go along with it. Now I should say also he was Matsuda's Ultimate Fighter 14, season 14 veteran. He did lose to Dustin Pegg in a very, close decision. Kind of controversial there, you could say, as well. So Matsuda's been in there with some solid competition throughout his career, and he's performed relatively well. Now, Beal, on the other hand, of course, we all know he's more well known for his striking. He's got pretty decent takedown defense overall. He keeps on improving his overall skill set. The guy does have a ton of power on the feet for that weight class. He's fast. I think he could be very effective in all sorts of areas, really. Especially, I mean, on the ground, he definitely, I think that's still his biggest weakness, or you could be concerned a little bit about Beal because I think he can get beat on the ground, but more times than not, he gets himself out of a bad position. He manages to get himself in a pretty solid spot, and then he can do more damage than not on the feet as well. So what Beal's going to look to do, I think, in this fight is he's going to look to push the pace a little bit. Matsuda's probably going to be backpedaling, moving, using some angles in this fight, and Beal's going to be landing a little bit more effectively and a little bit more often. So I think that Beal's probably going to outpoint Matsuda in this spot as long as he can control the tempo of the fight, which Matsuda, again, lets people do. So it should be a victory for Beal.
And I agree. For this fight, I'm definitely in Chris Beal's corner. The main thing that's sticking out to me, obviously, is the super short notice for Tateki Matsuda. Matsuda's he's a good fighter, but he just doesn't have enough time to prepare for this. I think he's going to be in pretty rough shape, honestly, by the time this fight takes place, just because Beal is going to have the full camp behind him. He's got the confidence from that first UFC win. And I just think overall Beal is a little bit of a better fighter. I think Matsuda's actually, he's a pretty competent fighter. Yeah, he lost to get into the Ultimate Fighter Season 14 house, but it was a competitive decision against Dustin Page. He showed off some pretty good striking ability. I think on the feet, his punching is okay, but where he shines the best is, he has some really good kicks. So if he gets an open space, he could definitely hurt Beal from distance. One thing, even though they're about the same size height-wise, Beal should have a reach advantage with punches. He should also be the bigger, stronger fighter physically. So if this fight goes to the ground where Matsuda is not a slouch, I think Beal would probably be able to hold top position, although I think most of this fight's going to be taking place on the feet. One last thing for Matsuda is he has a tendency to lose decisions. He's competitive in fights, but he's, in 4 of his 5 career losses, 1 was a disqualification, but in 4 of his losses, they were all decisions. 3 of them split decisions. So he hangs around, but I think he has lost to all 4 of the fighters he's lost to were worse than Chris Beal. So I would expect that Beal should be able to hold his own here, push the pace, basically pressure Matsuda, who is going to be looking to counter, and I don't think Matsuda's counters will be effective enough to help him win rounds. Beal is just going to be the more active fighter. He's going to score more points on the judges' scorecards, and he's probably going to walk away with a decision. If not, land something really nasty and put Matsuda away. Matsuda does train out of a really good gym with Mark Delagrati in Boston, but I just think that this is Chris Beal's fight to lose, especially on the short notice. Now moving on to the featherweight division, we have Sean Soriano, who is 8-1, taking on Chaz Skelly, who is 12-1. Now Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Skelly minus 180, the comeback on Soriano plus 140, and right now looking over at 5dimes.eu, that's what we're going to use. Every line on this entire premium oddscast is going to be courtesy of 5dimes.eu. Skelly right now is minus 240. The comeback on Soriano is plus 180. So more action coming in on Skelly. I'm not really that surprised. If you look at Soriano's debut in the UFC, now he was put in a tough spot. I mean, he had to travel overseas, make his debut as a co-main event fighter on short notice against Kawajiri, which is an outstanding veteran of the sport, outstanding fighter overall. I know Kawajiri's a bit on a little bit of a decline here, obviously as well, but still, I mean, stylistically, the way he matched up, Soriano was in a tough spot. He performed well early on, but Kawajiri was able to get him down to the second round and submit him. So he has that same type of opponent here in Skelly, but Skelly is not on the decline at all. In fact, he's coming off of that quick submission victory over Ninamaki. So that's fresh in everybody's mind. And I mean, stylistically, you would think that Skelly's a terrible matchup for Soriano because of, just those factors alone. Soriano seems to struggle on the ground a little bit, and Skelly is a ground guy. That's what he's best at. Skelly is improving his overall striking. Got to give him credit for sure. He's long, and he comes at you. I mean, when he has to, counter punches well. He uses his jab effectively as well. So he's getting better on the feet for sure. But still, I think Soriano has a huge advantage standing in this spot. So there's a big significant edge. I mean, Soriano throws with power. He makes things up a lot better. He's very solid. Of course, he's training out of the Black Zillion camp, so he's got some good training partners to go along with it. And he's going to be coming in looking for a win for sure to start off his UFC career 0-2. He probably gets cut actually if he doesn't win this fight. So this is a huge fight for Soriano. Skelly is taking this fight on last minute notice here. I think Soriano's matchup with Fili was a lot better for him as far as stylistically how they matched up, because those guys were going to stand and bang. Now Skelly's going to look to take this fight to the floor. I think it really all comes down to how Soriano's cardio is. If he does fade like he did against Kawajiri, he's probably going to get beat in this fight because Skelly at some point along the way will probably get him down and maybe finish him out by submission. But Soriano did have a full training camp in this spot. He's not traveling overseas. He's going to have momentum. He's going to have the crowd behind him as well here. So I actually think that Soriano has something to prove. He's a better fighter than what he showed in his debut. And I think stylistically he could probably keep this fight standing more times than not. And if he does, he's going to have a significant advantage over Skelly. So I do think that Soriano has ways to win this fight. And the funny thing is his cardio was a little bit suspect, of course, as I stated. But if you look at it before the UFC, I mean, he has gone 5 rounds before in fights. Now he does tend to fade as the fight goes on, but still, this is a 3-round fight. I think if with that full camp behind him, he should be able to go 3 strong. So I'm actually going to go on a limb and pick the underdog here in Soriano because I do think that he's better than what he showed. And even though Skelly's a tough matchup for him, I think Soriano's going to come through and win this fight.
And I'm going to come in, on the other side, but I completely understand your reasoning here. Soriano clearly is better than what he showed in his UFC debut on short notice in Japan against a great veteran in Kawajiri. But I do think that Chas Skelly, he's also better than he looked in his UFC debut, and he showed it in his last fight against Ninamaki. He was able to, against a terrific grappler, he was able to take dominant positions, really threaten, and then he has a really tight squeeze on that choke. And even though it wasn't a perfect rear naked choke, he was able to look really good and force the tap. Now, on the feet, while I completely agree with you that Skelly is going to be outmatched, I do think that Skelly is improving. He closes the distance well with big hooks and straight punches, basically to distract his opponent because he's not going to knock them out on the feet. And they allow him to get inside, which is where he wants to be. He wants to get in the clinch. He wants to get a single leg, go for a double leg, get a takedown, get this fight to the canvas, and then dominate. Soriano, he's going to want a little bit more open space. He's going to be throwing knees at Skelly as Skelly attempts takedowns. He actually looked really good with his knees against Kawajiri before Kawajiri was able to take him down. And in open space, Soriano's going to be the quicker fighter. He's going to have a little bit more pop on the feet, and he's going to be more dangerous. If Soriano's able to keep this standing, he'll win. I absolutely agree with you. I'm just not quite sure that he's going to be able to keep it standing. Skelly took 0 damage, and he's going to have about 2 weeks between fights here, which is ridiculous. It's almost, he's pulling a Chris Lieben here. But he took 0 damage in his fight. He's in terrific shape right now. So I don't think the fact that, he didn't get a full camp for this is going to affect him too much. And he does have that style that beat Soriano last time. And I think that he's a younger version of Kawajiri where, he just wants to close the distance and dominate on the ground. And I think he can. Because if he does get this fight to the ground, Soriano, he does have some issues. He gives up his back when he tries to get back up to his feet, and Skelly is fantastic at taking advantage of that situation and getting on people's back. When he is on top, he really sinks in the choke and he's aggressive. So I think I'm going to pick Chas Skelly, although I do think Soriano's going to look better than he did against Kawajiri. Now moving up to the middleweight division, we have Rafael Natal, who is 17-6-1, taking on Chris Camozzi, who is 19-8 overall. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Natal minus 230. The comeback on Camozzi plus 170. Line was a little high on the opener. Right now it's minus 170 Natal. Camozzi's plus 140. So the overall early action coming in on the dog. Can't blame him there. I mean, I personally wouldn't trust Natal that much either as far as, putting your cash and laying that kind of juice on him. I mean, the guy's a very talented fighter, don't get me wrong. I mean, he's actually pretty solid in every aspect of the game minus his cardio and chin, but those are 2 big factors in most cases. And Camozzi, that's a factor. I mean, those are 2 things that he's not bad at. I mean, he does have good cardio. He has a solid chin as well. So he's got those advantages over Natal. But other than that, I mean, Camozzi, even pure reach he doesn't have. He's a little bit taller. He's 6'3" to Natal's 6 foot. But I believe Natal still has a couple inches of pure reach on Camozzi as well. And I think Camozzi's best shot at winning this fight is actually outpointing Natal on the feet. If he can stay off his back, it didn't fare well with Camozzi staying off his back in his last fight. That's actually what cost him the fight against Santos. And I think, honestly, Natal's probably a better grinder, better grappler than Santos was in that spot. So this stylistically is another tough spot for Camozzi here. I think that Natal, even on the feet, his variety of attack, he could be a little bit more effective. And then, of course, Natal gets it to the floor. His submission game is far more superior than Camozzi. I mean, he could definitely submit Camozzi. He can at least control him, out-grapple him there as well. So it's all really going to come up to depend on Natal if he gives in or if he eventually folds or not. I mean, if he doesn't, I think he's going to win at least a competitive decision. He could submit Camozzi as well. I doubt he knocks Camozzi out. But Natal definitely, it's his fight to win or lose. I mean, again, in almost every area, he's the better fighter. Now, this is a betting podcast, though, and talking about the pure bet, it is kind of risky, though, laying juice on a guy like Natal, because, I mean, we've seen time and time again him dominating a fight, and then in that third round, just everything falling apart for him. So I think if that does not happen, Natal should win the fight more times than not, but that's always a possibility here about it. So my pick is going to be Natal. As far as the bet goes, I do understand why people are betting Camozzi. It's probably a dog or pass situation.
And I'm in complete agreement. You know, on paper, Natal should definitely win this fight. I think he's the better striker on the feet in terms of technique. He's able to do a lot more things than Camozzi is, and he's a little bit more active with a little bit more power. And on the ground, he's clearly the better fighter. He's got a little bit better wrestling, and then he's a significantly better grappler than Chris Camozzi. The difference here is toughness. Camozzi is definitely the tougher fighter, and Camozzi has better cardio. He is usually able to keep up his pace for the whole fight. The other thing that does bother me is Camozzi's defense is not very good. He actually takes quite a bit of damage in fights. So I think in this fight, Natal is probably going to start really strong. He's going to look really good, especially in the first round, because he usually does in almost all of his fights. And then he's going to start to tail off. So the real key here is he going to tail off enough for Camozzi to win the fight? And I think he won't, because against a fighter that has more finishing ability, then you'd be a little bit more concerned. You would think that maybe, like the Tim Kennedys of the world, the guys that, are able to get in there and just hit Natal with something heavy and knock him out. Chris Camozzi does not really have that finishing ability. Most of his finishes have been a couple submissions, which I don't think he would be able to do against Natal because of his grappling. And he did get a TKO due to cuts against Nick Catone. Again, I think that was more of a fluky thing off of his back, landing some elbows. So I don't think that kind of would happen. So as long as Natal plays it safe, paces himself, doesn't go out there and blow all of his conditioning in the first round and a half or so, he should be able to cruise control this fight and get the win. Camozzi just isn't really UFC caliber. He's on a 3-fight skid. I'm really surprised he actually got this fight after his terrible performance against Bruno Santos. But they're giving him one last chance, and I'm not quite sure that he's going to be able to pull this off. I think Natal's just a little bit too good. So I'm going to go Rafael Natal, but I'm not crazy confident about it just because of the chin and conditioning problems he's had in the past. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, you're right. I think Natal is the more skilled technical guy here. His striking stats and his ground stats are pretty good. The problem is that Camozzi is a high pace guy. He grinds out decisions because he simply stays very, very busy. He operates at a very high stand-up pace. He usually controls the cage. And even though he isn't necessarily doing a lot of damage, those types of things win rounds. So Natal, fortunately for him, he's going to have a little bit of a range advantage. He is the more powerful striker for sure, but he's also the more susceptible one with his chin. He actually has the worst chin rating on the entire card here. But Camozzi isn't necessarily a one-punch power striker. So, these things offset a little bit. I think Natal simply is the better all-around fighter. There is some risk there because he could just get outworked. And round to round, if he doesn't keep up pace, that could cost him. So, I think it's fairly close because of that potential, scenario, but I think Natal just he's the better guy, and in terms of picking a winner, I think he should win. And he's also capable of winning a decision as well as finishing it. So he has more paths to victory, I think. But you gotta just be careful about paying too much juice because he is susceptible as well.
All right. Excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, dropping down to the lightweight division, we have the final fight of the Fox Sports 1 prelims between Al Iaquinta, who is 8-3-1, taking on veteran Rodrigo Dam, who is 12-7. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I open Iaquinta minus 385, the comeback on Dam plus 265. Right now, Iaquinta's minus 515, the comeback on Dam is plus 375. Now, this is similar to Iaquinta's last fight against Mitch Clark. Iaquinta opened up a decent favorite over Clark. He got bet up, even more so, and he ended up getting submitted after a dominant performance here, in his fight early on. I mean, Clark did end up getting a pretty nasty, smooth submission, and it was a surprise because Iaquinta was looking really good in that fight. So it just, I don't know, this kind of freaks me out, and it's eerily similar in a lot of ways. But the thing with Dam is, I mean, he definitely has a huge advantage on the ground. He's got decent wrestling overall. He doesn't seem to use it as much, and his takedowns aren't the greatest, but once a fight does get to the floor, I mean, his submission skills legit, no doubt about it. He's improving his overall game on the feet, Dam is. He's actually becoming a decent and fun fighter to watch, strike, and he's got a pretty well-rounded skill set. You can tell he's been putting in the work, and he's actually, I think, improving, throughout his career. This is probably the best version of Dam we've seen. Now, he is 34 years old, so he's getting up there a little bit. His chin's going to be a little bit more suspect. He has lost by KO, I believe, 3 times throughout his career. So that's always a scary thing, especially like against a fighter like Iaquinta. Iaquinta is a tremendous talent. I mean, if he doesn't have those little brain lapses along the way, I mean, he could very well easily be undefeated throughout his entire, not just UFC career, throughout his career, period, in MMA. He's a very talented fighter. Iaquinta has good wrestling, good takedown defense. He's got pretty good striking overall. I mean, the guy mixes things up. I would like his strike defense to improve slightly, but I mean, what he dishes out and how busy Iaquinta stays and how effective he can be with his punches is pretty impressive, and it's pretty fun to watch. I mean, the guy has knockout power. And again, more times than not, even on the ground, offensively, he's pretty smooth. He has good takedowns. He has good top control. It's just those mistakes that he makes on the ground along the way cost him at times. So it definitely is Iaquinta's fight to win or lose here. I mean, he has so many advantages. He should be able to keep this fight upright. And if he does keep it upright, he's going to at least outpoint Dam, if not knock him out. So that's what should happen in this fight. Now, at the current line, minus 515 is her value. I really don't think there is at 515. It's one of those situations that it's probably a favorite or pass. And at the current price, you probably want to pass this fight because Dam is not that bad of a fighter. And who knows? I mean, Iaquinta could again slip up and get caught with something, but I highly doubt it here. I am pretty confident that Iaquinta does win this fight, but again, the current price is getting a little wacky.
Yeah, I agree. The line's a bit crazy, but you know, there's a reason that he's a huge favorite. Iaquinta is about 7 years younger than Dam. He's taken significantly less punishment throughout his career, and he's the better stand-up fighter. And while Iaquinta has been in trouble with submissions in the past, and Dam is a really good ground fighter, he just doesn't use the ground anymore. Pretty much the only time Rodrigo Dam uses the ground game is when he gets taken down, and then it's more defensive, stalling and all kinds of other things. So it's a bit perplexing just because that's a very important part of his game. But, you know, we've seen fighters do that in the past where they just kind of fall in love with their stand-up. And Rodrigo Dam's stand-up isn't bad. He's got a little bit of power on the feet. He's landed some big strikes, in his UFC career so far. But, the thing that scares me here is, you know, Iaquinta just pushes a better pace. He is more accurate. He has better defense on the feet and a better chin. So all the striking metrics are with Al Iaquinta, plus he's taken less damage and he's younger. So pretty much it's a clean sweep for me. And he's bigger because Rodrigo Dam, you know, he was fighting at featherweight, had some kidney problems, back up to lightweight. He hasn't had the same success beating people at lightweight that he did at featherweight. You know, he's a bit undersized. So pretty much every advantage right now is in the favor of Iaquinta. Plus, Iaquinta's going to be fighting closer to home. You know, Connecticut. He trains out in New York, Long Island area, with Chris Weidman. The biggest thing here, and it is a really important thing because Iaquinta's done it in the past, is fight IQ. Man, Iaquinta, if he fought smarter, he would have a much better record. He'd be much further up the UFC totem pole. But he does stupid things like shoot in for takedowns on guys that have better ground games than him. He does not have that good of a ground game at all. His submission defense is poor. And if he does something silly like shoot in for a takedown on Dom, he could find himself getting choked out. That's been his kryptonite in the past, and it's going to continue to be his kryptonite as long as he allows fights to go to the ground. So if this fight goes to the ground, I definitely think Dom has a chance. Dom has a puncher's chance on the feet, but it's unlikely. And as long as Iaquinta isn't stupid, which you cannot completely count him out on being, he should be able to win this fight. So my pick's going to be Iaquinta. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, it's interesting. You said it was kind of a clean sweep, and that's what the numbers say. Anybody checking out the Uber tail of the tape over in the premium section of the website, it's actually all check marks, right down, all on the line for Al Iaquinta. So he has the higher metrics, and yet, when you look more closely, it's actually slightly small, it's a very small margin. He's a little bit better, but pretty much in every area. And so the key ones that you mentioned, his actual striking pace standing up is going to be a lot higher. He actually averages nearly 14 standing strikes per minute, whereas Rodrigo Dam down at 11.6, and Iaquinta is going to be landing them more often. He's going to be avoiding them better, his striking avoidance, his defense, and he's a much younger guy. So for him to be dishing out punishment, not taking very much, that's going to add up, and it's really going to skew things in his favor. However, is there an opening on the mat? Absolutely. Dom is supposed to be a very high level jiu-jitsu player. So he could be throwing up some submissions on the ground. He does average a higher pace. But what's the takedown defense? So if Al is able to stuff those takedowns, and his takedown defense is pretty good, 81%, success rate. So that's very high. It's higher than average. And Dom is only landing offensively. He's only landing takedowns at about an average pace. So that probably suggests that this should stay standing, in which case I think over 3 rounds it's gonna go towards Al here. So, I agree with you guys. That's probably the macro trend. There is this crazy opening on the ground. If Al Iaquinta actually takes it to the ground himself and ends up getting caught, that's certainly one possible outcome here. And so it'll be interesting to see what kind of prop you can get on that one. But otherwise, this does look like his fight to win.
Now, kicking off the main card of UFC Fight Night 50 is a flyweight matchup between John Moraga, who is 14-3, taking on Justin Scoggins, who is 9-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Well, up in Scoggins, minus 280, the comeback on Moraga, plus 200. Early action has come in on the dog Moraga. He is now plus 185, so Scoggins is minus 225. Tough spot to open his line. I mean, obviously Moraga has fought for the title. He's one of the best at 125. We all know that. He's got a solid wrestling base. He's got a tremendous amount of power on the feet. He's well-rounded wherever the fight takes place. He's even got good submission skill as well. So Moraga got that title shot for a reason. I mean, the guy's definitely talented, and he's in the mix always at 125. He's going to be. But Scoggins, on the other hand, I mean, there was a ton of hype around him, entering the UFC. Overall, I think he's pretty much delivered. I know the fight against Ortiz, a lot of people were disappointed. It was a very, very close decision. A lot of people think it could have actually went to Scoggins as well, but I think people were disappointed and are kind of hopping off his bandwagon because that fight was so close and because Ortiz did so well against him. But you know what? I mean, Ortiz is just a little bit underrated. Ortiz is pretty solid overall, and that's just, I mean, Ortiz, I think, is actually in the mix, and you could really talk title contention with him as well along the way. So these guys at 125, definitely talented, definitely have a lot of skill, and they could kind of pick each other off, here and there, I think, as far as wins go. Now, that being said, I think this is a good matchup for Scoggins. I mean, I'm expecting it to be close, competitive, of course, like most fights again, towards the top tier of this division are going to be. But I think that Scoggins has some advantages in this fight. Overall on the feet, obviously Scoggins has that karate kickboxing background. He's a little sniper. I mean, the guy can mix things up well. I know he hasn't more people would like to see him do more damage on the feet. He hasn't really lived up to the hype as much on that aspect of it. But you could definitely see the talent and the skill set that he does possess. And I think that Scoggins, I mean, you give him more time in the UFC. He's so young still that he's going to continue to improve. He's going to continue to gain confidence. I mean, he was very bummed out with his decision loss against Ortiz last time out. And I think that's going to bother him. I think that, he's actually going to step up his game here. He knows that Moraga is a very talented fighter, and it's going to be another one of those type of fights that's going to be a very difficult one for him to overcome. So I think that Scoggins is going to be more prepared in this fight. Again, he has the advantages on the feet. He's also a southpaw, which is going to make things interesting as well. His wrestling and grappling, even though Moraga is more of a pure wrestler, pure grappler, I mean, Scoggins, for being a karate guy, I mean, he's been outstanding, I think, overall on the ground. I mean, the guy's shown really good offensive wrestling. His scrambling ability is pretty solid as well. So I'm not quite sure that Moraga's strength is actually going to still be enough over Scoggins. I think even the grappling aspect and the grappling battle could go back and forth here as well. So, I mean, I really think that Scoggins is going to show up here and with something to prove, and I think he's going to actually shine, and he's going to impress a little bit more so than we've seen recently. So I am leaning towards Scoggins, and the line dropping out there, I think there is potential and possibly a play on Scoggins as well. I mean, at minus 225-ish, I do think there might be some value in Scoggins, because I know Moraga, again, he's a tough guy to bet against because he's so talented at what he does, but I think stylistically, I just don't see many areas that Moraga is going to excel or be that much better than Scoggins in this spot. I do think it's going to be competitive, but I think that Scoggins is his really fight to win or lose. So if he doesn't make a mistake on the ground, if he doesn't get caught by a haymaker type of punch from Moraga, I think he's probably going to at least outpoint Moraga. If not do enough damage that you never know. I think Moraga's pretty tough, hard to stop, but if somebody gifted and talented as Scoggins, he could definitely do it. So, I'm going to lean and pick Scoggins here in this fight.
And I'm in agreement. I think that Scoggins is just overall the superior mixed martial artist. Moraga gets the hype because he fought for the belt, but honestly, he hasn't looked very good in recent fights. He looked pretty bad against John Dodson before the broken nose and the fight got stopped. And honestly, he should have lost to Dustin Ortiz in their fight. So, he hasn't looked the same since when he first debuted in the UFC and was able to finish Chris Carriasso and he looked really good back then. Got the big win over Ulysses Gomez. Something's off. His wrestling, which has been vaunted, isn't quite there. He gets taken down way too much. His striking is powerful, but it's not the most technical. And against somebody like Scoggins, who I think is a very dynamic striker, very good kicking ability, I just think that Scoggins is going to have his way with Moraga on the feet. One thing Moraga does have going for him, I think he has an underrated submission game. He's pretty solid in terms of grappling ability. So, if he catches Scoggins in a good choke or something, he might be able to finish the fight, although it's unlikely. And I think Moraga does have a little bit better punching power and a little more danger from his punches than Scoggins. So if Moraga is able to get inside and start landing some clean shots with punches and elbows, maybe he could, do some good damage to Scoggins as well. But honestly, Scoggins, when he first entered UFC, he had an incredibly impressive kicking game. He was a very dynamic striker. We haven't seen that yet in the UFC. He's been more adamant with his ground game. He's been much more focused on getting takedowns, top position, working for submissions, ground and pound, than actually showcasing just how good he really is on the feet. It's a little unfortunate because he's so entertaining on the feet. He has so many crazy things he's able to pull off, and we just haven't been able to see it yet. So I'm very interested to see if this is finally the fight where Scoggins showcases it, because in his last fight, he grappled a little bit too much with Dustin Ortiz. It was really close. He could have given it to Scoggins, but the judges ended up going the other way. So maybe this will finally convince Scoggins to showcase some of that stand-up ability that he definitely has. Honestly, looking at this fight, I think that Scoggins is the superior grappler to Moraga. Scoggins will probably get better takedowns in the fight. And I do think that on the feet, Scoggins is just going to be the quicker, younger, faster, and more dynamic striker. So I don't see a lot of ways that Moraga can win this fight, and I completely understand the hype and the betting line here. So I'm going to pick Justin Scoggins to pull it off. Now moving up to the featherweight division, we have a rematch between Nick the Carney Lentz, who is 27-6-2 with 1 no contest, taking on Charles Oliveira, who is 18-4 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Well, I opened Oliveira minus 190, the comeback on Lentz plus 150, and since that time, the overall action has come in on the dog on Lentz, and the line has dropped a little bit. Right now, it's Oliveira minus 165, the comeback plus 145 on Lentz. This is a tough fight. I mean, I have a tremendous amount of respect for both these guys here. Oliveira, man, I mean, the guy is such a stud, period, in all aspects of the game. It's a shame that, again, he has those lapses from time to time, and, you know, he seems to make mistakes, or he seems to just, against fighters like Cerrone, against that submission loss against Jim Miller was very surprising as well. And then Cub Swanson, I mean, I guess he can get outstruck on the feet or get landed on at least and get beat, or again, against a guy like Jim Miller, he got caught in that submission as well. So he has these lapses where you don't expect him really to have, because he's so talented. I mean, the guy's jiu-jitsu is just sick. It's off the charts on the ground. He's one of the best submission fighters that I've ever seen grace the octagon, offensively at least. Now defensively, again, he does have a little bit of flaws in his game, in the stand-up department and on the ground a little bit. And Lentz is a more well-rounded, solid fighter in that aspect of it. I think Lentz defensively, he's a little bit more sound, overall. And of course, we all know what Lentz is made of. I mean, he's an outstanding grappling-based fighter. He's got good wrestling, good takedowns, good control. His stand-up continues to improve and get nothing but better as well throughout his career. So he's not an easy out at all. I mean, I think Lentz is definitely one of the best fighters at 145. And you could say the same thing about Oliveira. So this is a great matchup. I know they're kind of rematching from that controversial ending that they had at 155, where Oliveira was obviously winning that fight before it did get stopped and he hit him with that illegal blow. But this is a tough one because Lentz has looked so good. I mean, if he can get top control and avoid Oliveira's submission game, I could see him grinding out a decision win here. On the feet, it's going to be pretty close if it does stay standing a little bit. I think Oliveira could be a little bit more effective than Lentz, but Lentz is going to be game there as well. And like I said, against Cerrone and against Cub Swanson, we've seen Oliveira kind of have some setbacks on the feet. So this is a very intriguing fight. I think you have to lean towards Oliveira, though. He's a little bit younger. He's fresher. He's 24 years old. There's a lot more upside. The guy continues to improve his overall skill set, and he's just such a threat. I mean, with his submission game offensively that, I mean, submitting Aoki, nobody's ever done that in the past, and Oliveira accomplished it and made it look pretty easy. So, I mean, that's how special this guy is with his offensive skill set. So you gotta kind of lean, I think, towards Oliveira in this spot. In most cases, I would take Lentz over, I think, most 145 pounders. But in this situation here, the way these guys match up, even though Lentz is so good and such a well-rounded fighter in his own right, I think Oliveira probably gets him here. So I'm going to go with Oliveira because he's just such a dynamic, explosive fighter in all areas that I think he's probably going to find a way to get this W here as well.
Yeah, and don't forget that these guys had a fight in the past, and Oliveira was dominating it. He was able to outstrike Lentz on the feet. He was landing huge knees in the clinch when the fight was up close, and then on the ground he was constantly threatening with submissions and really making Lentz uncomfortable. Now, obviously, we know how that fight ended. He landed an illegal knee as Lentz was still grounded, and the ref didn't see it. The result ended up being overturned into a no contest. That's why they both have a no contest on their record. But again, that was a long time ago. These guys are pretty much completely different fighters now. Since then, Lentz has dropped down to featherweight and looked amazing. He's switched over to American Top Team. You know, he's training out of a great gym, and he's really starting to put it all together. Unfortunately, I think Oliveira is really starting to click as well. Now, they've both had their ups and downs. Lentz had after Lentz has showed some chin issues, all of a sudden he goes and lasts 3 rounds against Chad Mendes. The guy's just tough as all hell. And Oliveira, he's continued to be able to finish almost every single person put in front of him. The guy has probably the highest finishing rate in the UFC. I think all but one of his fights inside the octagon has, been finished. So he's an incredibly talented fighter, and that is very dangerous because, Nick Lentz probably will put himself in some situations in this fight where he could get tapped. In the last fight, Lentz did pursue the takedown. He was able to get top position, but the second he did, Oliveira has probably the most active guard in the UFC. He was constantly threading his legs through and searching for leg locks and triangle chokes and arm bars and anything under the sun. I mean, he was diving on submissions. And Lentz was pretty game. I mean, he wasn't able to finish the fight until Lentz got hurt with that illegal knee. But he definitely had Lentz in some big trouble at multiple points. So I'm gonna lean Oliveira. I think he's going to have some similar advantages here, but I think Lentz is gonna put up a much tougher fight than the last time, so this fight's gonna be a lot closer. I do not 100% agree with the line movement, but I do think that Oliveira should be able to pull this out, but it's gonna be close. So my pick is Charles Oliveira. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, right out of the gate, Oliveira, 5-inch reach advantage, 5-year youth advantage. He's definitely got the better jiu-jitsu credentials. So on paper, in that respect, he looks like the more dangerous guy, and I think we saw that. We've seen him look dangerous with his stand-up and his submission game, which is phenomenal. Whereas Nick Lentz is more of a hardworking blue-collar fighter. He grinds it out. He works at a high pace. He takes a lot of damage. Actually, his defense is not that good, but because he keeps pushing forward and he outworks people, he's able to do more and be effective enough to grind out decisions. Now, I don't think he can do that against Oliveira because of the range. Oliveira should be able to get the better of the striking exchanges, and I don't think that Lentz just wants to hang out in the guard of such a dangerous submission guy. So, whether it's on the feet or on the ground, I give a slight edge to Oliveira, but there is that one, the path to victory for Lentz is just that he's a grinder. He's got some wrestling, he's got a high pace, he's willing to come forward and blast people. So there is that potential downside if Oliveira isn't on point and doesn't make the most of those opportunities. I just think that the numbers do favor Oliveira here. Based on where the line ends up, you have to evaluate whether or not he makes a good play, but I do pick him to win.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now moving up to the lightweight division, we have veteran Joe Lauzon, who is 23-10 overall, taking on Michael Chiesa, who is 11-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Lauzon -140, the comeback in Chiesa, even money. And the line kind of went crazy there. Everybody supporting Chiesa, coming in and betting on him. And the line flipped. Chiesa was almost peaking at around 2-1 at one point. Now the line's dropped back down, currently at 5-9. It's Chiesa -140 plus 120. So basically, slight lean towards Chiesa, remaining out there as far as line goes across the board, it looks like. Pretty much, and I do understand it, and I do see it again. This is a type of pick'em fight to me where you probably could give the slight edge to Chiesa. Now, overall though, I do think Lauzon's the better, more well-rounded fighter. I think he's better on the feet. I think his pure jiu-jitsu game is probably better than Chiesa's as well. The advantages that Chiesa has though, I mean, on the feet, he's gonna have some reach. I believe he's got 5 inches of actual reach. He's a southpaw. He's got those two things going for him. And even though he's not a fierce striker, Chiesa's definitely improving in that area. He's starting to throw with a little bit more power, a little bit more confidence, for sure. But make no mistake, Chiesa's game plan in most cases is to get the fight to the ground and work his wrestling and submission game. Now he does have pretty solid, takedowns and jiu-jitsu game, of course, top control. He loves to get your back as well. His ground and pound starting to get a little bit better. Everything. I mean, the guy's only, I believe, 24 years old, so he keeps on improving as his career continues to move forward. So that's what you gotta love, about Chiesa. I mean, surprisingly, the guy's improvement level is pretty fun to watch. I mean, the guy's getting better with each fight, it seems. Now, that being said, against Lauzon, I mean, this is not necessarily an easy fight. I mean, again, Lauzon, I think, is the better fighter overall. He does have, again, I think, an advantage of pure striking, an advantage of pure jiu-jitsu. But Lauzon has been put on his back, throughout his UFC career, against guys that are capable wrestlers and takedown artists as well. And he has been beat. on the ground as well. So that's going to be Chiesa's game plan. Lauzon's going to have to avoid some of that. Lauzon's going to have to avoid Chiesa maybe pinning him up against the cage as well. And he's going to have to counter off that. Now, Lauzon, in my opinion, is probably the best version that he's been, throughout his career. He is 30 years old, and I think fight years is kind of beyond that because the guy's been in so many wars. So there might be a bit of a decline kind of happening with Lauzon, or you can expect to see it eventually here. But, I mean, as far as cardio goes, that's one question mark I've had throughout Lauzon's career. I think if he kind of had his cardio in check earlier on in his career, he'd probably be a little bit more successful than he is now. But at this point, I mean, he is definitely putting in the work, and you could see the improvement level in that aspect in those regards as well. So this is, again, kind of going to be a tough fight, I think, even as far as the pick goes. I'm going to lean towards Chiesa because it's all about, sometimes you got to look at the matchmaking. I think there's a bigger upside for Chiesa for the UFC. I mean, he's, again, the younger, fresher fighter. Getting a win over a guy like Lauzon is nothing but a great notch on your belt as well. And this is definitely a winnable fight for Chiesa. So I'm going to slightly lean towards Chiesa. This is a spot where, I mean, I don't think you have tremendous confidence in it because, again, Lauzon's probably the better overall fighter in this spot. So I wouldn't be shocked at all to see Lauzon pull off the upset here, but at the same time, I wouldn't be as shocked to see Chiesa grind out a decision win or even possibly finish the fight on the ground against Lauzon. So my official pick is going to be Chiesa here in this spot. I think he probably will get the job done, but this should be a fun scrap while it lasts.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree and disagree with some parts of that. I do think that there are parts of Joe Lauzon that are the best he's ever been. I think his conditioning definitely is better. You know, he used to be a guy that would just come out 100 miles an hour, pedal to the metal, try to get that super quick finish, and if it didn't work, he'd be in big trouble. That happened against Sam Stout, that happened against George Soteropoulos, and, he has finally started to tone himself down a little bit. It happened against Kenny Florian. Now he's able to go a little longer. His last 3 fights have gone to decision, which was almost never going to happen in a Joe Lauzon fight because it was either him getting a finish or he was going to get finished. But I will say that I think one of the problems here is that Joe Lauzon has taken a lot of damage. In 4 of his last 5 fights, he has gotten the tar kicked out of him. Against Anthony Pettis, he got knocked out. Against Varner, he took a ton of punishment before weathering the storm and coming back. Against Jim Miller, he got obliterated early. And then against Michael Johnson, he got beat up for all 3 rounds. Bad. So, he really was only able to turn it around in his last fight against Mac Danzig, where he just used his offensive grappling and was able to get top position for 3 rounds against a guy that retired right after. So, I'm gonna say that I think that he's not as good as he used to be in terms of stand-up ability. I think he's taken a little bit too much punishment. It's starting to add up. All those bonus award-winning fights, you just can't fight like that forever. And I think that he's at a point where it's starting to catch up to him. And I can think Michael Chiesa, he's not the type of guy that's going to super be able to take advantage of that just because he's not the most dangerous. He doesn't have the most powerful strikes, and he's not a big submission threat. But Chiesa pushes a good pace. Chiesa's going to be a lot bigger and longer than Lauzon, and I think Chiesa should be able to outwork him a little bit on the feet, and so he's going to be in relatively good shape. One thing I am concerned about is the ground game. While Chiesa does have a really good ground game in his own right, and he probably will have the wrestling advantage, Joe Lauzon is no joke on the ground. He's going to be very tricky. He'll be throwing a lot of submission attempts at him, and he could catch him. Lauzon has a very good ground game. But I think on the feet, Chiesa should be able to beat him. And if he keeps it on the feet, he definitely should win, just because of that youth advantage, the reach and everything in his favor, and just all that punishment that Joe Lauzon has taken. So, at some point that's going to catch up to him, and I think we're going to start seeing Lauzon get hurt a lot more often in fights. It hasn't quite happened yet, but he definitely has slowed down, and that is a concern. So, I think that Michael Chiesa should be able to win this fight. He's got that good offensive wrestling. If he uses it defensively to keep the fight standing, he should be able to outwork Joe Lauzon here. So, my pick's going to be Chiesa. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, the numbers are more one-sided, I think. Qualitatively, I think both these guys are really good. They're dangerous. They've gotten by their careers with very good grappling. But on paper, the numbers say that Chiesa has all the advantages standing. Not only does he have a clean sweep on the traditional tail of the tape, age, reach, stance, but he also sweeps almost all the striking metrics. So he's going to be the more dangerous striker with that range and the southpaw advantage on top of it. I think with his range, he is simply just going to win more exchanges, and he's going to be visibly dominating the cage control. And so round to round, if they stay standing, I think Chiesa wins the points for those. But on the ground, Lozon is the more dangerous guy, actually. He attempts submissions at an absurdly high rate. And we mentioned fighting off his back. His ground control time is about even. He does spend a fair bit of time on his back, but I think some of that is by choice. I actually worked with him on the Jamie Varner fight, and the plan there was to let Varner blast forward, tire himself out, get in top control, and then look for a sweep and a late submission, which is exactly what Joe did. So he's willing to fight off his back because he is very dangerous from there. Now Chiesa, as this much bigger guy, he's got a pretty good ground game as well, so maybe he stays out of trouble. It's just round to round, Chiesa should be getting the points here. But Lozon, very crafty veteran, never count him out of a fight. His grappling is awesome. It seems like it keeps getting better, even though neither one of these guys is technically a black belt, I don't think. They both have very good submission games. So Lozon remains dangerous. It just, on paper, the odds are a little bit stacked against him.
Now moving up to the heavyweight division, we have Matt Mitrione, who is 7-3, taking on Derek Lewis, who is 11-2 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Lewis minus 150, the comeback on Mitrione plus 110. This line went crazy early on. All the action coming in on Mitrione. It flipped the line. Mitrione started climbing around 150, 160-ish and heading in that direction. Now, if you're looking at the line over at 5 dimes, it's back to Lewis minus 160. So the sportsbooks have been getting a lot of two-way action on this fight. Because I think a lot of people are split out there. I mean, Lewis has looked pretty solid, especially in his couple fights that he's had in the UFC. But throughout his career, Lewis is basically known as a powerful brawler, tough as nails. He's got good cardios, and he's very agile for his size, man. I'll tell you what, he does move pretty well. He's able to scramble well. He's kind of sneaky good. If that makes any sense. He's sneaky good in almost every aspect of the game. Because if you look at his stand-up skill, he's not the most technical striker, but that brawling style that he does have, he does damage. He's got 10 knockouts, I believe, on his resume. He's got a ton of power. Once he does get the fight to the floor, his wrestling's okay. It's not the greatest, but it's okay, and it can be definitely effective. And once he gets the fight to the floor, he's got nasty ground and pound, and he usually finishes his opponent. So, and a lot of times throughout his career, he's actually outlasted and, kind of weathered early storms against, his opponents and was able to, get the job done as well with his cardio and with his toughness. Now, this is an interesting fight against Mitrione because Mitrione is actually the better fighter overall, I think, in this matchup. Mitrione on the feet, I think he's a little bit more technical. He's a little bit better. I think he's a better striker overall. Now, power-wise, it's obviously going to be close because both these guys pack a punch, and you could say that Lewis has the pure edge of power in his striking technique. But Mitrione obviously can be very effective. The guy's got 6 knockouts in his resume. As we all know, he grew up in the UFC, so Mitrione's fought nothing but solid competition against good fighters out there. He's continued to improve and develop his overall game. The guy's actually looked good. He is getting up there in age a little bit. He's 36 years old compared to Lewis's 29, so Lewis has a little bit of a youth factor to take in consideration, but I'm not sure if that's going to play too much of an impact in this fight. I think Mitrione ultimately, to win this fight, he needs to stay off his back. He needs to not let Lewis bully him around, and he needs to just kind of stay on the outside and work his striking. And I think he's going to be able to land a little bit more effectively. And Lewis, one thing about Lewis is he's not extremely fast. I think Mitrione has a speed advantage in this spot as well. So he could do a little bit more damage. And if he does, getting hit, even though Lewis is a tough guy and he hasn't been KO'd throughout his career, I think that Mitrione's the type of guy that he's strong enough and he could land enough punches that you never know. I mean, he could finish Lewis as well. So that's not out of the question. But he does, I think, have the overall advantage on the feet. Mitrione's takedown defense is continuing to improve overall. So I think if he's able to keep it upright against Lewis, I can see Mitrione winning this fight. It is a tough fight. I'm going kind of back and forth on it myself as far as a pure pick goes. So really, I'll check out the weigh-ins and see. I mean, both these guys are obviously going to weigh heavy, so it's not going to be too much of a drastic change or whatnot. But as of right now, I'm leaning towards Mitrione. I think that he should be able to keep the fight upright, and if he does, I think he's going to be landing the more effective strikings and at least outpointing Lewis along the way. But should be a very close competitive type of decision if it hits the scorecards, and it should just be a war back and forth as long as the fight lasts, period. So I'm going to slightly lean towards Mitrione at this point. I think he is a little bit just the more capable. He's fought better competition type of fighter right now. So I think Mitrione is probably going to come away with the win here.
Yeah, and I'm in agreement here. I'm going to go with the slight underdog, mainly because I think Mitrione is just the better athlete. He's quicker. He's a little bit more physical, and and he's the better striker in distance. Lewis is very dangerous if he can get the fight to the ground, keep you down, and start, dropping that huge ground and pound. I mean, that's how he's finished both of his first 2 UFC fights. But Lewis is still a very raw fighter. I think he's getting hyped up a little too much for beating the likes of Jack May and Gudo Inocenc. I just think that in open space, Matt Mitrione is going to tear Lewis apart. Lewis was having a little bit of trouble with Jack May's kicks in the beginning of their fight before he rushed forward, bull rushed him, and got him down. Now, Matt Mitrione does not have the greatest takedown defense. That has been a bit of his kryptonite in the past, but that was against the likes of Chet Congo, who has pretty underrated wrestling, and Brendan Schaub, who definitely has some good wrestling. Heading into this fight, if Mitrione can thwart the takedown attempts from Derek Lewis, he's going to be able to pick Lewis apart in open space. I think his pure stand-up ability is clearly better than Lewis's. He's going to be able to throw some nice kicks. His punching is fantastic. He does a lot of damage when he is in open space, as you saw in his last fight against Sean Jordan. And he was fully prepared for this camp. I mean, he was training for Stefan Struve before that fight got canceled on fight day. So, he's more than ready to go in there. And one thing that has helped Lewis is he's been the bigger, stronger guy in his most recent fights. He might have not had a height advantage on Jack May, but he was much bigger, physically heavier, and stronger. And against Matt Mitrione, they're going to be the same height. Mitrione will be about the same weight. And, Mitrione has that NFL experience, so I think he's going to have just as much strength, if not more, than Lewis. So Lewis will not be able to bully him around the cage like other fighters. So I'm going to go with Matt Mitrione here. Lewis just does not offer enough in the stand-up portion, and I think Mitrione's going to land some big shots on him, and we might see a fighter finally able to stand up to what Lewis brings here. And I think Mitrione can dish out some serious punishment if he's able to keep this fight standing. So my pick is going to be Matt Mitrione. Now, sticking with the heavyweight division in the co-main event of the evening, we have Alistair Overeem, who is 37-13 with 1 no contest, taking on Ben Rothwell, who is 33-9. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
The Reem opens minus 380. The comeback on Rothwell plus 260. Since that time, though, another crazy line movement here. It's minus 550 for Overeem. The comeback on Rothwell plus 425. So a tremendous amount of support on Overeem in this spot. Stylistically, it really should be a good matchup for him. He's got several advantages in this fight. I mean, if you look at it across the board, he's a better jiu-jitsu fighter. He's a better wrestler. He's a better striker. The only thing that I think Rothwell has over Overeem really is probably, well, Rothwell does tend to slow down at times too, but his cardio does seem to be getting a little bit better. So he might have a slight cardio advantage, and of course he's got a ton of chin and heart possibilities. Now Rothwell has been knocked out in the past, I know that as well, but still I think the guy overall has a better chin than Overeem. And again, I think he's got that desire to win and really a tremendous amount of heart overall too. So those advantages that are not going to probably get him the win over Overeem. Now, Overeem has been training with Jackson's camp, I mean, as many of us know out there, so I think that's only going to help his case. in this spot. And if his chin holds up, I mean, he really should win this fight. I think he's probably going to follow that type of game plan where he gets Rothwell on his back, drops him ground and pound. Overeem does, again, have kind of sneaky submission skills as well. So you never know if he goes for a sub there. But other than that, I think Overeem can control and dictate the pace of the fight. So I do understand why everybody's going crazy and including Overeem in parlays. But man, I just don't trust that chin. I mean, time and time again, it's kind of let him down, especially since he's made his UFC debut and has had a few fights now in the UFC as well. So there's too many suspect things, I think, to be very confident in Overeem in this fight. And again, Rothwell, you got to give the guy credit where credit's due. I mean, if you look at it in his last couple of performances, they've been pretty solid. He's, you could tell he's putting the work in the gym as well. He's probably at a really good point mentally in his career, and I know he's confident, thinks he can beat Overeem. So I think this should be kind of a barn burner. It depends on what game plan Overeem does have. Now again, with the addition of Greg Jackson and crew in his corner, I think that will probably be a smart game plan, and they'll know how to control and dictate the tempo of this fight, and he'll probably get the nod again. So more times than not, you got to go with Overeem here. Again, I think it is maybe the line's getting a little out of hand because Rothwell's probably better than the current line indicates, but you got to look at it as real as you can, and Overeem should have so many advantages in this fight that it is really his fight to win or lose.
And I'm in agreement here. Overeem is an extremely dangerous striker. He has, great knees in the clinch. He's solid at distance with heavy punches. He has pretty good defense overall. And it looks like he's been working on his conditioning. He was able to go the full 3 rounds against Frank Mir. It seemed like he had a point to prove in that fight. And he has an above average ground game, including a solid ground defense, where he can go into dangerous guards and come out unscathed. Now, obviously, the big problem with Overeem in his past has been his chin and his conditioning. He slows down in fights. So, if Rothwell's able to keep this fight standing, I think that he has a chance, just because if Overeem slows down, like he did in the Bigfoot fight, like he did in the Travis Brown fight, maybe Rothwell can knock him out like he did, late in the Brandon Vera fight. So he's definitely capable of pulling it off. Do I think he's going to pull it off? Probably not. Rothwell has a really good chin. He can take a lot of punishment, but man, his defense is terrible. There's a reason we say he can take a lot of punishment. It's because he has taken a lot of punishment. And he's not very fast. He's not very athletic. So it's not like this guy is going to be able to avoid a lot of what Overeem's throwing at him. I mean, I would not put it past Overeem to shoot in for takedowns and just stay on top of Rothwell for 3 rounds like he did in the Frank Mir fight. That's a pretty safe strategy. It's not the most entertaining thing, but it would definitely guarantee that he pulls out this victory. So, overall, I do think that Overeem is clearly the better fighter. There's a reason he's a huge favorite. It's a little scary just because Rothwell has power, and Rothwell, while he's not the most conditioned guy either, he definitely is dangerous late in the fight, like he showed in his last one. So there's a chance that Rothwell catches Overeem late in this fight, but it's not a big chance, and I think that Overeem should be able to remain in relative control of this one and pull out a pretty one-sided victory. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, it's funny. These guys both play into the weakness of one another. Basically, Ben Rothwell, we talk about his chin and his ability to take a beating. He has the worst striking avoidance of anyone on this card by a long shot. Basically, he allows his opponents to tee off on him. And Alistair Overeem, on the other hand, is the most accurate stand-up striker on this entire card. So per exchange, Overeem should be putting a beating on Rothwell. But you guys also mentioned Overeem's chin. He's been dropped a couple times. It's happened where he's definitely been cruising along, doing very well, controlling the fight, and then he gets tired and clipped. And it's happened twice. He's been knocked out that way in a fight that he was winning. So this looks exactly like that recipe, but we should be seeing a better Overeem. We should be seeing better conditioning, and we're also seeing a little bit of a smarter fighter. Against Frank Mir, he just chose to take a more conservative path and own the fight on the ground. And so he is capable of doing that as well. His takedown accuracy, although he doesn't attempt a lot of them, is very high. And Ben Rothwell is just sort of average everywhere. Actually, arguably he's below average in all of his grappling credentials. So, the stats definitely are lopsided. They're one-sided over on Overeem. But as you guys said, you have to factor in the price. And the line is getting very steep. And this is a heavyweight fight. It only takes one shot. And we've seen it with Overeem a couple times where one shot has basically ended the fight. He's been stunned and then finished. And Rothwell is capable of doing that. But what's the percentage that it'll occur? It's still, I think, Overeem should win this fight. You just have to figure out what juice you're comfortable laying on Overeem, considering that there is that one path to victory for Rothwell.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now moving on to the main event of the evening, we have a middleweight contest between Ronaldo Jacare Souza, who is 20-3 with 1 no contest, taking on Gegard Mousasi, who is 35-4-2 overall. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I open up Jacare Souza minus 210, the comeback on Mousasi plus 160. The line right now is minus 310 for Jacare. I mean, it's climbed up significantly. It was actually a little bit higher too. Now it's we're starting to see the books get a little bit of action back on Mousasi, which I think is justified. I think the line, honestly, over 3-1 is kind of ridiculous. I understand that what Jacare brings to the table. He's definitely one of the best 185-pound fighters, middleweight fighters in the world, and he's been for a long time. I mean, the guy has that grappling base background that we all know. I mean, he's one of the best grapplers in the world, and he's been for a very long time. Abu Dhabi, everything. I mean, his credentials they speak for themselves. So the guy is that sick on the ground, no doubt about it. He's got good wrestling, and once he gets to the floor more times than not, you do not survive against this guy. I mean, amazingly, Carmon did, but that was a little bit of a surprise for all of us as well. So it is possible to do, but more times than not, Jacare gets you down, you're done. Now, of course, this is a rematch from their fight a long time ago in Japan where Mousasi won the fight with that tremendous up kick that caught Jacare and knocked him out. So a lot of people think it was flukish, and that's the type of situation. It is a little bit flukish, no doubt about it. I mean, how often do up kicks land and knock people out? So I can understand that. So we didn't really get to see this fight play out as much as we wanted. Jacare was able to get Mousasi down to the floor. So I think a lot of people think it's going to be a repeat performance where Jacare, in a way, gets the fight to the floor and kind of manhandles Mousasi. But I don't think it's going to be as easy as everybody thinks here. I think, obviously, Jacare's stand-up skill is improving. But at the same time, you got to look at Mousasi, and his takedown defense and his wrestling has improved drastically. I mean, he's really been putting in the work. Mousasi's always been a very talented striker. He knows that. I mean, pretty much the world knows that. Everybody knows that. But what his flaw has been is definitely the ground game. And Mousasi has elevated his work ethic and his overall, I think, his cardio. This is another guy. We were talking about bad cardio earlier, that early on in his career, you could tell Mousasi tended to fade a little bit more. His gas tank was a little bit questionable. It wasn't terrible, but it was still questionable. Right now, Mousasi's the best version that he's ever been. He's going to be the younger, fresher fighter compared to Jacare. I think Mousasi's, takedown defense and his wrestling has improved so much. Look at his fight against Munoz. I know it's a different matchup, but that was a tremendous performance. He was able to really keep pace and dictate, stay off his back. Even when he did get in a little bit of trouble there quickly, he got out of it right away. And he's such a vicious striker, even underground. Mousasi has that killer instinct. He's got 18 knockouts on his resume for a reason. The guy's just a pure stud. And now that he's, I think, tightened up the gaps in his, biggest flawed area, which is the ground, he's going to be a rough out for most people in the middleweight division. So at the current price, I do think there possibly some value on Mousasi here. And as far as a pick goes, I think Jacare is going to probably struggle getting Mousasi to the ground. And if he does struggle getting us to the ground, even though Jacare's stand-up has improved, I could still see Mousasi outpointing him and possibly knocking him out. I do think that's a real good possibility here throughout. So Mousasi definitely has to avoid getting put on his back because you don't want Jacare, fiddling on the ground with you too much at all. But I think that Mousasi realizes that. from all accounts, from all the training camp photos and everything that I've been hearing, Mousasi looks like he's in tremendous shape. So I think he's going to be ready and he's going to be game to come in here and pull off the upset win. A lot of people are going to be surprised, but I think he's probably going to get the job done. So I know he's a significant dog in this type of situation. Really, more times than not, you kind of pure pick wise pick the favorite, but I'm actually going to go on the limb here and pick Mousasi because I think that this is the best version that we've ever seen, and he's going to continue to get nothing but better. Much respect to Jacare, but I think he's probably going to get caught and maybe knocked out in this fight.
And while I agree with parts of this, there are a couple things I'm a little concerned about. Jacare definitely is the superior grappler. He is the superior wrestler. So I can definitely see him shooting in and getting Mousasi on his back, although Mousasi's takedown defense is getting improved. On the feet, this is going to be probably Mousasi's fight to lose, although you got to give a little bit of credit to Jacare. His stand-up is getting very good. He was able to knock out Derek Brunson in seconds. He blitzed Yushin Okami and put him away. Granted, those guys aren't elite strikers like Mousasi is, so it'll be a little bit different this time around if this fight stays standing. On the ground, Mousasi definitely showcased some really solid takedown defense and submission skills against Mark Munoz in his last fight, and Munoz is a terrific wrestler, so that was very impressive. So he has that going for him. But for me, Souza is just such an incredible elite athlete, and that is going to be dangerous. Even though he is a little bit up there in years, 34 years old, and that is going to catch up to him at some point, he's going to have that explosion, that athleticism that a lot of people don't have for as elite Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu players. He's able to get in and get those big takedowns, those double legs if he wants to. In terms of the grappling, I do think that as long as Jacare is extremely aggressive with it and persistent, he will probably get Mousasi down, especially early in this fight until he starts to tire. I think with a 5-round fight, both of these guys, they have 5-round fight experience, although Mousasi has not had the most success in his 5-round fights. He lost the 5-round decision to King Mo, granted, at light heavyweight, and he lost recently the decision to Lyoto Machida, where he just, he got outstruck. He landed a couple more strikes, but Machida was able to control just about everything about that fight. This fight will be different because this time Mousasi is clearly the better striker, in my opinion. Although I do think that Jacare has a little bit more pure power with his single shots. Mousasi's more of a volume guy, is able to put it on people, and he does have good power in his own right. As Nick mentioned, one of the differences here is chin strength. I do think that Mousasi can take a shot a lot better than Souza, so if these guys are on the feet trading blow for blow, Mousasi will probably get the better end of it just because he can handle it a little bit better. He does have a 5-year youth advantage, although he has fought twice as much as Souza practically. So, that adds up as well, although he does have some pretty good defensive metrics in it throughout his career. I'm going to go ahead and pick Souza, but I completely agree that this line is out of whack. So I can completely understand why people are starting to come in a little bit on Mousasi, because this fight, the odds should be a lot closer than they currently are. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, yeah, this is looking a lot closer on paper than the odds would suggest. Souza, he made his career run based on his grappling, but he has seriously improved his stand-up striking just recently, and that is very much apparent. And so, actually looking at these two guys side to side, Souza does have the higher knockdown rate and slightly higher accuracy, but he's deficient in his pace. His jab is weak. He really swings for the fences. The share of power strikes when he's choosing to throw hands, he really doesn't mess around with the jab very often. He swings for the fences. And so that's very aggressive, and I think it works against hesitant strikers. That probably won't work against Mousasi. I think Mousasi will be able to see that kind of thing coming, keep his distance. He is the longer fighter, and stay outside. So, Mousasi's head strike avoidance is actually very, very good. It's way above average, arguably best on the card. So he should be getting the better of the stand-up. And if he uses his range and doesn't get lazy, he should be able to win round-to-round points if it stays standing. Now Souza, very dangerous on the mat. He has dominated opponents in terms of ground control, whereas Mousasi has not. Mousasi has actually been out-wrestled on occasion. And so if there's a path to victory there, Souza probably wants to make this a gritty, grappling match. And he should get the better of it. But in terms of the numbers, there's a number of factors that lean towards Mousasi on this, and so he should be a very game opponent. And I will say that regardless of what happens, whoever gets through this fight has a very legitimate shot at title contention. I mean, they have a case to be made because both these guys are top caliber guys in the division. If either one of them getting a win over the other is very interesting in terms of shaking up the rankings. I mean, technically, Souza is currently ranked a little bit higher, but Mousasi gets the upset. He absolutely has a case for a title shot. So, this is going to be a fun card altogether. We got a lot of fun matchups, but this main event really is an important one.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 50. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Thursday around 8 p.m. Eastern Time, so stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsBreaker.com premium member. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow @Premium Oddscast on Twitter, because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there, so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.